Guten Abend, liebes Publikum, and welcome everyone. Mein Name ist Benedikt Wolf. Ich moderiere den heutigen Taz-Talk über den französischen Theoretiker Guy Hocquenghem. Ich selbst bin Literaturwissenschaftler und arbeite an der Universität Bielefeld und ich bin außerdem einer der HerausgeberInnen des Jahrbuchs Sexualitäten, das ich gleich jetzt schon zum ersten Mal in die Kamera halte. In diesem Jahrbuch wird der heutige Taz-Talk in der nächsten Version 2021 erscheinen. Das ist heute eine Kooperation zwischen der Taz, dem Taz-Talk einerseits und der Initiative Queer Nations andererseits. Es ist also ein Taz-Queer-Talk. Ich möchte jetzt schon mal kurz Werbung machen dafür, wenn Ihnen diese Taz-Talks gefallen, können Sie auf taz/zahl-ich mit einer Spende diese Talks unterstützen. Most of this talk today will be in English, but you can also post your comments and questions in German or English. Und Sie können Ihre Kommentare posten, sowohl über YouTube als auch über Facebook oder per E-Mail an taztalk@taz.de. And I am very happy to welcome my guests for this Taz Queer Talk tonight. My first guest is Antoine Idier, and I'll briefly introduce him. Antoine is a sociologist working at the School of Arts of Caen, Cherbourg. And he has written a book, it's actually his PhD, with the title Leben de Guy Hocquenghem, Politik, Sexualität, Kultur. That's in German, Die Leben des Guy Hocquenghem, Politik, Sexualität, Kultur. It's a biography, and this book, along with other writings about Guy Hocquenghem and the French homosexual movements, is the reason why we invited him tonight for this talk. Salut Antoine, it's good to see you.
Hello.
And where are you speaking from?
From Paris. I'm right now.
You're in Paris now.
Yeah.
Okay, nice, thank you. Antoine will be giving the lecture on Guy Hocquenghem. In the discussion, we will be joined by two other scholars, by Lukas Betzler and Hauke Branding, and I will introduce them briefly as well. Lukas Betzler holds an MA in German Studies, Musicology and Sociology, and he is currently working on his dissertation project about early critical theory at the University of Lüneburg. And Hauke Branding is a sociologist from Hamburg. He works on critical theory as well and on the history and theory of homosexual movements. Hi, Lukas, and hi, Hauke. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Nice to be here.
Yes, very nice to be here.
Und wo seid ihr gerade?
We're in Hamburg in my study, actually. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So Lukas and Hauke published in 2019 a new translation of Hocquenghem's central work in French, Le Désir homosexuel, and the title of the new German edition is Das homosexuelle Begehren. In der ersten Übersetzung von 1974 hieß es noch das homosexuelle Verlangen, jetzt heißt es Begehren. This book goes along with an afterword by the two Lukas and Hauke Branding, and this afterword is a really good critical introduction to Guy Hocquenghem, I think. So Antoine will be speaking for about 25 or 30 minutes. After that, we will start the discussion, including Lukas and Hauke, and also questions and comments from the audience. That means, dear audience, please use the comment and chat function to pose your questions and comments. Antoine, I am looking forward to your lecture.
Great. So, hello, guten Abend, everyone. And first, I want to apologize for speaking English this evening. I would love to be able to speak in German, but unfortunately I'm not. So my German is too bad for such a discussion. And despite 10 months of COVID crisis, I'm still not totally self-confident with Zoom and online video discussion, so I hope it will be fine. Anyway, I'm very, very pleased with this talk and discussion. So many thanks to the audience, and thank you very much to the TATS, to Jan Federsen, Peter, who organized all the technical things, Benedict and Initiative Queer Nation for all the organization. And I also want to express special thanks to Lucas and Hocke, with which I'm very, very pleased and happy to discuss, and who did a wonderful work on Hocquenghem as editors, as translators, and more. My presentation will be divided in three parts. First one more biographical and factual. A second one that comes back to certain aspects of Hocquenghem trajectory and life. And a last one with some remarks on the circulation and posterity of Hocquenghem's writings as an opening to the collective discussion. First, as I don't know how familiar you are with Hocquenghem, here are some biographical information, and as a trick or a trap for your attention, here are two pictures of Guy Hocquenghem a few months before the publication of his book Homosexual Desire. The book was published in French in 1972, and the pictures were taken both in 1971. So Guy Hocquenghem, as you may know, was an activist, a philosopher, a theorist, a journalist and novelist. He was born in 1946 and died in Paris from AIDS in 1988. He has published about 20 books and dozens of articles, and one of the most famous book being Homosexual Desire, about which we are talking tonight. He comes from a bourgeois family. Both of his parents were professors. His father was a mathematician, and his mother was a teacher of literature. He grew up in Paris and in the Parisian suburbs. He was educated at the prestigious Lycée Henri IV in Paris, where he had a relationship with his professor of philosophy, René Scherrer, with whom he wrote several books years after. And after Lycée Henri IV, he was admitted to the prestigious École Normale Supérieure de la Rue d'Ulm, where he was admitted in 1966. From the middle of the 60s, he was a Marxist activist, and especially a gauchiste. A gauchiste in the French politics of the 60s means at the left of the Communist Party. Hocquenghem was especially member of the youth organization, the Union des étudiants communistes, the Union of Communist or Socialist Students, which opposed to the Communist Party, in particular on the subject of the Algerian War, on the subject of the struggle against imperialism and the Stalinism of Soviet Union. With other activists from the Union des étudiants communistes, Hocquenghem was excluded in 1966 and then became a member of a new organization, which is an ancestor of the current anti-capitalist party in France, which name is Jeunesse Communiste Révolutionnaire, which is very often described as a Trotskyist group. It was indeed a Trotskyist group, but more in a more negative and a positive way, in the way it was Trotskyist as an opponent to the Stalinist deviation and to the Communist Party and its links to the Soviet Union. As a sign of historian fetishism, here is one of the oldest articles by Hocquenghem I found during my research. It was published in 1965 in Avant-Garde Jeunesse, 67, sorry, in Avant-Garde Jeunesse, the journal of the Jeunesse communiste révolutionnaire, and it is about the political situation in Greece. Then Hocquenghem was very involved during the events of spring 68 in Paris, and after 68 he was excluded from the Trotskyist group and became a Mao's Pontex activist. Mao's Pontex is a mix or intersection between Maoism and spontaneism. And which is the most important for us tonight, he joined in 1971 the FAR, the Front homosexuel d'action révolutionnaire, homosexual Front for Revolutionary Action, the first radical gay group, homosexual group founded in Paris in the beginning of 1971. Here you have a photo of protest action of the FAR at the Pleyel Hall in Paris, the classical concert hall. During this action, the activists interrupted a radio program on homosexuality, and this action is very often considered as the founding act of the FAR, although there have been previous actions before, but it was after this action at Pleyel Hall that the name FAR was chosen. And as you can see on the picture, which was taken by Catherine Dedon, a feminist photographer, there are women on the pictures and famous women, famous feminist and lesbian activists, some of them very prominent in the history of feminist movement and theory. I don't know if you recognize them, but they are from the left to the right. Marcia, Christine Mafra, sorry, Christine Delphi, Monique Wittig, the author of The Straight Mind, Elisabeth Salvarezzi, who is perhaps less known, an unknown woman, we don't know who she is, Antoinette Fouque, who was the founder of a psychanalyst feminist political group, and Anne de Bacher. It's a very important point for the history of LGBT group and LGBT radical group in France that the FAR was founded by a radical French activist. The radical French feminist movement, the Mouvement de Libération des Femmes, was founded a few months before with a symbolic action on August 1970. So women founded the FAR, but also most of the women also left the FAR very soon, before the summer 1971. They left or they felt excluded by men within the FAR, and women, lesbian and feminist activists reproach the FAR for reproducing male domination and for not conserving of homosexual liberation from a feminist point of view. Hocquenghem joined the FAR just after this action at the Pleyel Hall, and his first major contribution was the coordination of the issue of the newspaper 2. You have here the first page of this newspaper. 2 was the newspaper of Mao's Pontex group, Vive la Révolution. And this issue, the 12th issue, was devoted to sexual and homosexual liberation. Here you have insider pages. This is a very, very crucial issue for several reasons. First, it's the first major written contribution on homosexuality within the revolutionary left in post-68 France. And this contribution was published in a radical, widely read left-wing newspaper whose aim was to be a popular left-wing newspaper whose design and layout was very audacious, as you can see, with colors, with collage and artistic work. And as the newspaper, as this issue was published every 2 weeks, and as this issue was published at the end of April 71, it was this issue which was distributed during the demonstration of May 1st, 1971, which was something very important for the circulation of the radical homosexual ideas and writings. And many leftist activists were outraged and refused to sell the issue. And also feminist activists, both heterosexual and lesbian, responded to some of the articles in a later issue of 2. Here you have also the self-portrait of Hocquenghem, published in the Nouvel Observateur, a French center-left magazine. And it was with this self-portrait that Hocquenghem became a public figure for the French left. In January 1972, his mother answered the week after in the Nouvel Observateur. And you have also a copy of the first edition of Homosexual Desire, which was published in September 1972. Then you have some photo of the French context. It's photo of a demonstration on Vendôme Square in Paris in January 1972. Vendôme Square is the square where is located the Ministry of Justice. It's a protest of the group d'information prison, the group founded by Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze, about the situation in French prison. And on this photography, you can recognize Hocquenghem. Of course, you recognize his hair, but there are also Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, on the two photos on the left, and there is also Michel Foucault, of course, on the photo of the right. Some other photo with Gilles Châtelet, an activist and a member of the group of the artist Helio Oiticica in Brazil, with the filmmaker Lionel Soucaz in the US, and with Piotr Stanislas in Razdep, the movie on the history of homosexuality that Soucaz and Hocquenghem wrote in 1979. I go very fast. I forgot a lot of things and details, but I have to say that Hocquenghem was professor of philosophy at the experimental University of Vincennes, whose department of philosophy was founded by Michel Foucault, and where Gilles Deleuze was also professor of philosophy. Hocquenghem was close to Deleuze, close to Félix Guattari, close to also the French philosopher François Châtelet. Hocquenghem became also journalist in Libération, the leftist newspaper, which is, I think, a close cousin to the Taz. Hocquenghem wrote on sexuality, on childhood, on sexual consent, on racism. He wrote novels, he wrote philosophical essays. He co-authored another film with Lionel Soucaz, with Tino in 1985, and you have here a photo of Hocquenghem in the movie. Perhaps I want to underline three key questions about Hocquenghem, and which I focus the most on my biography. The first one is how did Hocquenghem become a gay activist? The second one is the history of May 68 within the French radical left, and the third one is more generally a link to the history of the French radical left. A significant part of my biography focus on the definition of a new politics and a new radical politics invented by Hocquenghem and French LGBT activists, and I try to describe a symbolic revolution, being an expression of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. That is to say, a transformation of categories of perceptions and a transformation of categories of politics. And I underline how the creation of a radical gay movement like the FAR is strongly linked to a struggle inside or within the left about the definition of radical politics, of radical subjectivities. Here you have a quotation from a text written by the FAR just after the demonstration of May the 1st in Paris, and it reveals how the FAR was not addressing to the whole society, but was mainly and firstly addressing to the left, addressing to the respectable leftist, as the activist wrote. And what I want to say is the fact was the creation of the gay movement was a radical shift in terms of political subjectivity. And I try to describe Hocquenghem trajectory as a reconceptualization of the political, and how Hocquenghem and other activists, feminist activists and gay activists describe revolution revolution as a personal transformation in daily life, including sexuality. And the formation of a radical homosexual movement was not only linked to matters of sexuality, but also the very meanings of politics. And the creation of such a movement was inseparably linked to a range of political reconfiguration and struggles about the political. The roots of the radical sexual politics of the FAR are located in a strong homophobia of the radical left. And the years following May 68 in France have to be read as a succession of steps, as a series of political ruptures that led to gay liberation. You have here a quotation for autobiographical book by Hocquenghem, The Amphitheater of the Dead. You are here the first part of the quotation, and then the second part of the quotation. The book was published in French after the death of Guy Hocquenghem, and the scene described in this quotation was situated in 67. And there are many and many examples of such situation of the homophobia of the radical left. For instance, during the occupation of the Sorbonne in May 68 in Paris, first gay group was created, but the poster that were put inside the Sorbonne were destroyed by other leftist activists. And this is why in many writings, and especially in Homosexual Desire, Hocquenghem tried to describe a new conception of politics in opposition to the classical Marxist conception of politics, as you can read in this quotation from Homosexual Desire. And we can also read another quotation from Monique Wittig from the Straight Mind, and which is very close to the Hocquenghem previous one. And if we try to understand what happened between May 68 and the beginning of 71 in France, is a lot of political discussion and political shifts to challenge the definition of the political and to challenge the definition of the political subjectivity. And as I said previously, the trajectory of Hocquenghem is very fascinating in the way we can see a series of steps or a series of political rupture just after May 68. I chose some quotation very quickly, which shows the major break brought by May 68 with this quotation. Also the reference of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Of course, it was a big misunderstanding about China and the Chinese Cultural Revolution. But what is very interesting in Hocquenghem trajectory is the way he defined a cultural revolution. It's a revolution towards the family, towards the parental function, towards psychiatry, towards university, and concerning all the daily life. Hocquenghem was excluded from the Trotskyist group after May 68, and part because of his sexuality, part because of his spontaneism, or what was called spontaneism at that time. He became very close to Maoism and to Mao's Maoist spontaneism. And he began to write about counterculture, about drug, about cultural revolutions. For instance, he wrote about Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, and he experienced communal living. And this is this series of steps that led to the creation of the FAR through a contestation of or challenge of the traditional conception of Marxist politics. Here is a quotation a few months before the creation of the FAR. We are just 2 years after May 68, and it reveals the gap between the political events. With you can read it with what he wrote about revolution, what he wrote about socialist aims or socialist conceptions of politics. Of course, what is also very fundamental is the creation a few months before the FAR of the feminist movement, the MLF, Mouvement de Libération de la Femme, and it's a quotation by Hocquenghem who underline what brought the feminist movement to the homosexual groups. what I also try to show in the biography and in my writing about Hocquenghem is how the history of May 68 is very fundamental to understand the creation of a radical LGBT movement. Not only May 68, not only the history of May 68 as an history of the events which took place during May 68, but an history of the inheritage of May 68 and an history of struggle about definition of May 68. As the previous quotations show it, there was a big discussions within the radical left trying to define what happened in May 68 and what inheritage can be found of what happened. Yeah, I think I don't have so much time, so I will move to the third part, and as a conclusion and as an opening to the collective discussion. It's about the international circulation and intellectual exchange on Guy Hocquenghem. You can see many book covers of homosexual desire in Spanish, in English, in Italian, in French, which is very striking in history of cultural circulation of Hocquenghem writings, is the fact that his books had at least two lives. Homosexual Desire was first published in French in 1972. Then it was translated in Italian in 1973, in German in 1974, in English in 1978. And then the book knew a second life from the middle of the 90s, with a new edition and a new translation in English in 1995, in French in 2000, in Spanish at the beginning of the 2000 with a foreword by Paul Preciado, and now in German. And the new discovery of Hocquenghem is very fascinating in the way how queer theory constituted him as a founder or as a father of queer theory. And it's not so common operation. He was constituted afterwards as a precursor. For instance, in the US, the second edition of Homosexual Desire was published in a collection linked to the queer theory, and the queer theorist F. Kosowski-Sedgwick described Hocquenghem as a queer theorist avant la lettre. In French, the new edition was published through Didier Ribon after the publication of his book, The Insult and the Making of Gay Self, which was translated in German recently, but I forgot the title in German, sorry. And Ribon showed how Hocquenghem book was fundamental to understand Foucault writings, and especially Foucault of the will of knowledge and the history of sexuality. Finally, as a final conclusion, a few words about also the violence of circulation. Here you have two books, the same books actually, Screwball Asses, which was published by Semiotext in the US a few years ago, and Für den Arsch, which was published in German more than 1 year ago. It's a translation of a text anonymously published in 1973 in French, and which was attributed to Hocquenghem when it was translated by Semiotext. But as I explained in my biography, it was not written by Hocquenghem. It was written by someone whose name is Christian Morel, who was a member of the FAR. And the scrupule asses were not written by Hocquenghem, but were also a strong criticism of Hocquenghem conception. So, and the misattribution was corrected through the translation in German, and which is something also very important today when the text and the writings of author are translated or begin to circulate outside, is how there is not always a misattribution like this one, but always a text missing or misunderstanding, or in the situation of Hocquenghem, all of his writings are not translated, so there are only some parts of his writing translated, which can lead to misunderstanding and to kind of violence to his writings and to his thought. Many thanks. It was my last word, so many thanks for your listening, and let's begin the discussion.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for your talk, which that I really enjoyed. Liebes Publikum, noch einmal kurz zur Erinnerung, Sie können sich in der Kommentarfunktion auf Facebook und YouTube oder über die E-Mail-Adresse taztalk@taz.de an der Diskussion beteiligen, und wir alle freuen uns sehr über Ihre Beteiligung. I think my first question to you, Antoine, would be the following. You emphasized in your talk, in your lecture, very much the Marxist, Trotskyist, Maoist context of Hocquenghem's political socialization. In my impression, currently, at least in Germany and in the United States, Hocquenghem is more seen as a post-structuralist theoretician. My question would be, is his theory a turning away from Marxism and materialism, or would you say it's more a kind of development?
I think, thank you very much for your question. And I think you are right in the way he had a strong background in a Marxist background, but he very shifted from it. And for instance, his conceptualization of homosexuality is at least not Marxist or materialist, but he was very influenced by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and especially Anti-Oedipus, which was published in 1972 in France, a few months before Homosexual Desire. And Hocquenghem attended the lectures of Deleuze at Vincennes. He was very close to Guattari, and he used more Anti-Oedipus and also Foucault and History of Madness by Foucault than Marxist or materialist tools for conceptualizing sexuality and homosexuality. And at least there is, I think there is not so much materialist things in Homosexual Desire, which explains some. It was very interesting, for instance, to read what a Marxist British group like Geleft published when Homosexual Desire was translated in English in 1978, because for the precisely Geleft and the materialist activist of Geleft reproach Hocquenghem for not being enough materialist and to be like an elitist libertarian theoretician.
So if I understood your afterword correctly, Hauke and Lucas, your opinion on this is a different one, right?
Yes,
I think
kind of. Yes. Well, I think it's the same with psychoanalysis, where we would say that Hocquenghem is still like, he criticizes Freud and criticizes psychoanalysis, but he develops it, and his theory is deeply rooted on it. And the same, I think, or we would say with Marxism and materialism, because, or on the one hand, there's this materialism that is not Marxist in Hocquenghem, which is more like the Fourier materialism that has influenced him. And then we would say, yes, that his take on homosexuality is sort of, he tries to introduce homosexuality as a materialist category in this work.
Yeah, definitely. I think what struck us reading the book, I mean, Antoine mentioned a couple of things, but I mean, we would read it as at least a very consequential attempt to think about the relationship between homosexuality, homophobia, and capitalism. And of course, also the way in which this society forces certain categories onto its members. So our perception is rather that we have a combination of what we would now call early post-structuralist thinking, so going back to Foucault, Deleuze, Guattari, but also we think that you could not really understand homosexual desire, the book, without the Marxist background, because he also uses certain Marxist categories, like, for example, he criticizes the way in which value is made in this society. He criticizes the fetish. So he uses a lot of Marxist terminology within his take on homosexuality and sexuality in this society. But I think it's still true that it is kind of a turning point if you look at the later works of Hocquenghem, where he is definitely shifting more and more away from Marxist and materialist theory, which is maybe also because of the strong homophobia within the political left in France, especially within the Communist Party.
So is this materialist aspect of his theory one of the causes that you chose to translate his book again? Or could you more generally elaborate on the causes why you chose to translate this book in 2019?
Yeah, that is indeed a good question. I mean, yes, definitely. I think his as I said, his attempt on to think about the relationship of homosexuality, homophobia, and capitalism was one thing that we found to be very remarkable about this book, and still inspiring today, of course. But that's not the only reason. I mean, Antoine already mentioned a couple of very interesting points, I think. Which struck me personally was his perspective, not only like the combination of post-structuralist and materialist thinking, but also introducing first-person politics, I'd say. So he's so much theorizing about homosexuality as he is also theorizing from a homosexual standpoint. And he wants to speak for himself. He wants to influence the way in which knowledge about homosexuality is conceived. He is promoting the today well-known idea that the private is political. So there's a whole list of things that we found to be very remarkable about this book, and still inspiring today. I mean, of course, some of the things also Antoine mentioned are rather historical, or rather interesting from a more historical standpoint. But I think his take on capitalism and homosexuality, and capitalism and sexuality, as well as his combination of psychoanalysis, Marxism, and thinking of early Foucault and the anti-Oedipus is, I mean, when I read the book the first time, I thought, I've never seen something like this before, although I, of course, wouldn't agree with everything he says.
Speaking of which, one thing that has annoyed me very much since I've read it for the first time, his book, this is the theoretical divide that he introduces into homosexuality. Like there's primal homosexuality, which is anidipal and molecular, versus molar homosexuality, which is oedipalized, and you know all that stuff. And I'm getting a bit polemical perhaps now, but I think this could be one of the causes why it's actually appropriate to call Hocquenghem one of the forerunners of queer theory, because you find exactly this differentiation again in, like, for example, Lisa Dugan's concept of homonormativity, later on in Jasbir Puar's concept of homonationalism. You have bourgeois homosexuals, bourgeois white homosexuals versus whatever, I don't know, the queer fighting community. Do you see this connection as well, and how would you evaluate it, Antoine? I think there's a technical problem. Yeah, you see that too. Perhaps, Lucas, do you want to answer my question, or to like comment on the question?
Maybe I can give it the start while Antoine is recovering. Yes, that is a criticism of Hocquenghem's work that is very pertinent, I think, and maybe, or there has been a very good text or sort of book review of Das homosexuelle Begehren on Sociopolis by Aaron Lahl a few months ago that has stressed this point, and I think it's impossible to completely refuse that criticism, and but it's actually a criticism that queer theory did also, like in Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. We have also that criticism of a something that there was a sexuality before the law, sexuality that is sort of original, and that is that we have get back to, that has to be desublimated or something. But yeah, I don't know, maybe you want to continue.
Just as an addition, I think we find this conception of or this separation in a way of desire also in Fourier, and I think this segregation or this division goes back to the influence of Fourier in Hocquenghem's work, because Fourier also sees desire as corrupted by society, and he wants to liberate this desire and from this corruption. So, but it's not something that he would think of as mediated by society, but rather as something very original and pure that is like an ontological thing to humans and not mediated through the way in which we relate to one another. But yeah, I think this is also something that we mention in our afterword. I mean, at least a little bit, that this is definitely a theoretical problem within his work.
It seems like Antoine is recovering slowly, but I think he'll need another minute.
Sorry,
there you are.
I don't know what happened. Sorry, I'm very sorry.
No problem. We're glad you're back. Did you get my last question about the divide in Hocquenghem's theory between primal and Oedipal homosexuality?
Yeah, and the comparison with homonationalism and Lisa Dugan and normativity. And I was saying, for me, it's a very important question, because it's not the part of Hocquenghem writing I like the most. And there are two trends in Hocquenghem writing on sexuality. One conception trying to constitute or to create a group and to create a sexual class, and trying to overpass social determination or social differences to create a sexual group. And there is one more discussing for me part, which is full of distinction distinction, as Bourdieu said, in the way there is a hierarchy between good radical queer and bourgeois queer, and not enough political queer, and we see it a bit in homosexual desire. For instance, when he wrote about couple, about sexuality, but we find it also in further writings after, and this intersection or this conflict between the two conceptions is very interesting for me, and how he sometimes he shifts to a very normalistic conception, a very normative conception of what a gay should be, even if he criticizes the normative conception of the left.
Mm-hmm. Okay, which brings me to a few more points that I think both of you, Antoine, in your biography, and the two of you in your afterword mentioned there is more to criticize about Hocquenghem. For example, in later writings, not in this book, but in later writings, there are some anti-Semitic overtones in the comparisons between the Shoah and persecution of homosexuals under National Socialism. But there's also this strange flirt with the Nouvelle Droite and even with Benoit, I think. Do you think there is a connection between the theoretical problem that you addressed and these other critical points?
I'm thinking. I'm not sure. I don't think there is a connection about de Benoit and La Nouvelle Droite, the new right. I don't know if La Nouvelle Droite, how familiar it was, a group of intellectuals trying to invent and to reinvent right-wing thoughts in France in a very terrific way. And Hocquenghem made an interview of Alain de Benoit, and I think the interview was very criticized in France. But even if Hocquenghem has a kind of fascination to de Benoit and to La Nouvelle Droite, he was very clear on the implication. And for instance, he described Nouvelle Droite as a fascist. So I think he wasn't close to the position of the Nouvelle Droite, even if he wrote that some questions raised by the Nouvelle Droite were interesting to him. And for instance, the biological or the racial questions. For the anti-Semitic part, it was in one way, it was because of the question of the recognition of the homosexual deportation. On another way, it was a way of trying to be subversive or trying to be transgressive, which is not transgressive at all, which is just anti-Semitic. But I'm not sure there is a link, except perhaps kind of habitus bourgeois, or a feeling of distinction, and like a pamphletic writing or pamphletic style in his writings.
Okay, Lucas, do you have any thoughts on this, or?
Yes, maybe I would stress too that there's on the one hand there's this very polemic quality of Hocquenghem's texts, but nevertheless I think these anti-Semitic slurs or parts in his journalistic writing are very, very irritating. And his being close to the Nouvelle Droite, I think my impression is that it has something to do with his theoretical thinking too, in that way that there's when well, he does a critique of progress, of critique of enlightenment, of civilization, that and he wants to he says goodbye to the subject, to the idea of an autonomous bourgeois or subject. So and these ideas can very easily, I think, become or have a tendency towards irrationalism, especially when they are not materialists anymore. So I think that that's a tendency that makes it's sort of elective affinity that I see between Hocquenghem and especially his late ideas and like the ideas of the Nouvelle Droite. Yes, and when I'm right, so most of the informations I have or we have is I have from the wonderful biography that Antoine wrote. But if I'm right, he planned to. He had a book project he wanted to do with Alain de Benoit that only was not completed realized because of Hocquenghem's untimely death in 1988. So there was really a sort of collaboration.
And if I can add something, Hocquenghem has always the aim to oppose to the dominant position of the left, and he has something very reactive in his thought and in his writings. I was struck when I read the small text by Walter Benjamin on Karl Kraus, because Benjamin says that Kraus has something very reactive in the way trying to react what the dominant position are. And Hocquenghem was kind of fascinated by Kraus, and I think he had to this kind of will of reaction, but reaction in the two meanings of reaction. It means reaction to react to what the dominant position are and what the dominant position within the left are, and always wanted to criticize or to deconstruct the thought of the radical left, but sometimes it became reactive in the second meaning, in the way of reaction and opposing to progressive trend and to shifting on some points to some conservative position.
Let's come back to the things, to the more progressive aspects before we close for one last question, I guess. And progressive aspects, I think, is a celebration of desire that I really think is good, great to read, but also his celebration of anal sexuality, which is really interesting theoretically. So my last question for the three of you would be, do you think there is a kind of a Hocquenghem renaissance now, or should there be one?
I think as we are talking about Hocquenghem, it's an evidence of Hocquenghem renaissance in the way where, I don't know, just the fact that I wrote a biography that Lucas and Hocke decided to translate to make a new translation of homosexual desire, and there are last years there were many translations, many new editions, which are connected also to a rediscovery of 68 of the 70s. But yeah, I think there is a renaissance in the way that radical sexual movements want to raise radical questions, a lot of radical questions, and find or can find or try to find in Hocquenghem writing some ideas, some questions, some answer. And I think we have a lot of things to find in Hocquenghem. So yeah, I think we can observe a renaissance. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, especially the point that you mentioned, Benedict. When we look at queer theory, or at least most of it, and within the gender studies, there is little talk about like actual sexual practices, like for example, anal pleasure or anal sexuality, but rather there is a very abstract debate about sexuality and its role within society. And if we look at not only Hocquenghem, but also Monique Wittig and other writers of the early 70s, and all of which were in the wake of 68, there is a certain perception of sexuality, not only in an abstract way, but in a way that is affecting everyone very directly. And especially within homosexuality, and especially in France, where there was a huge institutionalized homophobia, and anal pleasure was very oppressed and also repressed by the individuals. And I think that is one thing, maybe one reason why there is a renaissance, not only of Hocquenghem, but of the thought of concrete sexual practices within the thinking about society and sexuality.
And maybe if I can add that, I mean, Hocquenghem, it's the book, Das homosexuelle Begehren, is about homosexual desire, and especially male homosexual desire. That's evident, but at the same time, it transcends this identity, and this sees like homosexuality and homosexual desire as a passage towards the end of gender, of two genders. So in that way, he's really a predecessor of queer theory. I think there's one passage where he writes something like, "To get to know desire is to forget the sexual difference of the Geschlechtsunterschied." So that's very interesting, and at the same time, I think it's a sort of way of queer thinking that is before the linguistic turn and before the cultural turn in that was crucial for queer theory. So it's not that language based. It's not, homosexuality is not only something that is constructed by language for Hocquenghem, but it's a very material, bodily thing, a drive, a desire. So I think that's an important impulse for contemporary queer thought.
And also, if I may add, for psychoanalysis in a way, because there is, at least within the German-speaking world, there is, or also English, like a group. I think in Vienna, they have like a program called Queering Psychoanalysis. Without, I mean, there are lots of projects of queering psychoanalysis, but they do it in a way that they won't get rid of psychoanalytic terms and concepts. So they actually want to take what psychoanalysis does best and what queer theory explains best, and they are also turning back to Hocquenghem, because he's one of the first ones to think about the abolishing of the Geschlechtertrennung, the gender divide, and from a psychoanalytic standpoint.
Thank you very much. Für mich war das heute ein faszinierender Vortrag und ich fand die Diskussion auch ganz wunderbar. Und ich freue mich schon sehr darauf, Antoines Aufsatz im Jahrbuch Sexualitäten 2021 zu lesen. Das ist heute nochmal eine Kooperation zwischen der Initiative Queer Nations und der Taz. Ich möchte mich bei beiden herzlich für die Organisation dieser Veranstaltung bedanken. Wenn Ihnen der Talk gefallen hat, wie gesagt, unterstützen Sie die Taz über taz.de zahle ich. Das müsste eigentlich auch unten noch eingeblendet werden, glaube ich. Un grand merci à toi, Antoine.
Danke sehr, sehr, sehr.
Vielen Dank an euch, Hauke und Lukas. Außerdem möchte ich mich ganz herzlich bei allen bedanken, die zugehört haben. Und last not least möchte ich mich auch herzlich bei den beiden bedanken, die diesen Talk technisch möglich gemacht haben, nämlich bei Peter Grohrmann und Luisa Faust. Vielleicht zeigt ihr euch auch noch kurz für den Dank. Sie möchten nicht? Na gut. Auf Wiedersehen. Bye.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.